Imagine a place that appears out of nowhere. A town that doesn't exist on any map. The roads all lead back to the same place. Something about it keeps you there. But is it even possible to leave? This is a story about mysteries lurking around every corner and a choice that could change everything. Are you ready to face the truth? Let's begin. Tom was behind the wheel of his old car, his eyes tiredly scanning the road ahead. He had set out on this journey to escape the monotony of everyday life and find something new. The GPS, which had always worked flawlessly, suddenly decided to fail. The route disappeared from the screen, leaving him staring at a blank map. "Great," he muttered, turning onto a small road that seemed to lead toward civilization. The road twisted and turned through a dense forest, and with each passing mile, Tom's unease grew. Just as the sun dipped below the horizon, he spotted a small, cozy-looking town ahead. It seemed like the perfect place to stop. Quaint houses, clean streets, and perfectly trimmed lawns. Yet something about it felt off. Tom parked his car near a little cafe on the main street. As he stepped inside, the conversations of the patrons abruptly ceased. "Good evening," Tom greeted cheerfully, but he was met with only a few awkward smiles and quick glances. A waitress approached him, her smile wide but unnervingly stiff, her eyes strangely hollow. "What brings you to our town?" she asked. Tom shrugged. "My GPS decided to give up on me, so I'm looking for a place to rest." She nodded and quietly walked away to prepare his order. From the corner of his eye, Tom noticed the other patrons whispering to each other, occasionally stealing glances at him. After his coffee, Tom decided to take a stroll. The streets were lit by soft lamplight, but they were eerily empty. There were no children playing, no noise, not even a dog barking. He passed a few townsfolk on his walk, but they all wore the same forced smile and avoided direct eye contact. Stopping at a small notice board, he saw a few faded posters pinned to it. He reached out to inspect one closer but froze when he heard the creak of a window opening behind him. Turning around, he caught a glimpse of someone quickly pulling the curtains shut, hiding in the darkness of their home. Exhaustion crept over him, and Tom decided to spend the night at a small inn he had noticed on the edge of town. The innkeeper greeted him warmly, but his smile carried the same unsettling quality as the others. "We have a room available. I hope you'll find peace here," he said with an odd tone that lingered in Tom's mind. Something about this town gave Tom an uneasy feeling, but he decided to stay the night. The morning in the town began quietly. Tom woke up in his room at the inn, but the strange tension from the previous night still lingered. Determined to make sense of it all, he decided to explore the town, hoping to find some answers. The sun bathed the streets in light, but they still felt unnaturally empty, as if the town was frozen in time. He returned to the same cafe he had visited the night before. While ordering coffee, Tom noticed something odd. The newspapers on the tables were old and yellowed. He picked one up and froze. The date on the paper was from 1987. Maybe they're just into antiques, Tom thought, but the details stayed with him, gnawing at the edges of his mind. As he sipped his coffee, his eyes fell on an old clock hanging on the cafe wall. The hands were stuck at 3:15. He remembered seeing the same time on the clock tower in the town square earlier. To be sure, he pulled out his phone, which showed a completely different time. The synchronicity of the clocks unsettled him deeply. "Excuse me," Tom said to the waitress who brought his coffee. "Why are all the clocks in town stuck at the same time?" For a moment, she froze, then gave him the same unnatural smile he had seen the day before. "Oh, they've been broken for ages," she said casually. "This town doesn't change as quickly as people think." Feeling increasingly uneasy, Tom decided to talk to other townsfolk. At the market, he approached an old man selling vegetables. "Have you lived here long?" Tom asked. The man nodded, avoiding his eyes. "All my life," he replied, but quickly added, "You shouldn't ask too many questions, stranger." Tom tried to press him about how to leave the town and find his way back to the highway. The old man simply pointed toward the road Tom had taken to enter the town and said, "The town decides who stays." His words sent a shiver down Tom's spine. And before Tom could ask anything else, the old man retreated to his stall. That evening, things took a more unsettling turn. As Tom walked the streets, looking at the old shop signs and trying to piece together the town's mystery, he felt eyes on him. He stopped and turned around, but the streets were empty. Yet, when he looked at the houses, he noticed movement behind the curtains. Someone was watching him from the windows, but they would quickly disappear as soon as he looked. His pace quickened as the sensation of being observed grew stronger. It seemed like every house had its own pair of eyes following him. In one window, he thought he saw a face staring directly at him, but it vanished the moment he focused on it. Tom returned to the inn that night, feeling the weight of something heavy on his shoulders. He sat in his room trying to make sense of it all. Was it just his imagination, or were the townsfolk truly hiding something important? The next day, Tom knew he couldn't just sit and wait. The unease of the previous night was too much to ignore. Determined to find answers, he decided to investigate further. His attention was drawn to a small building with a sign that read, "Library." Inside, the air was thick with dust, and the shelves were lined with ancient books. The place felt forgotten, untouched for years. As he combed through the shelves, he came across an old map of the region. It was yellowed and fragile, but it seemed detailed enough. Tom unfolded it and began searching for the town. He scanned every corner, but the town simply wasn't there. He checked again, convinced he must have overlooked it, but all he found was an empty area marked forest. His heart raced as the reality sank in. This place wasn't supposed to exist. Maybe it's just an old map, he thought, trying to rationalize the discovery. But every other town and road on the map matched the current layout perfectly. Tom carefully folded the map and tucked it into his bag, deciding not to mention it to anyone just yet. Determined to leave, he headed back to his car. He started the engine and drove down the road he had used to enter the town. At first, everything seemed normal. The forest stretched out ahead, and he felt a flicker of hope. But after a few minutes, he noticed something strange. The same signs, the same bends in the road. Suddenly, the town reappeared in front of him. "This can't be happening," Tom whispered, gripping the steering wheel tightly. He turned the car around and tried a different route, but no matter which way he went, all roads led him back to the town. It was as if the town itself had a grip on him, refusing to let him go. Frustrated and scared, Tom decided to seek help. He found the old man he had spoken to at the market and begged him for answers. The man hesitated but eventually led Tom to a bench under a large tree. His face was weary, his voice low but heavy with meaning. "You've noticed it, haven't you?" the old man asked. Tom nodded, showing him the map. "This place isn't on any map. The roads don't lead out." "Why? What is this place?" The old man sighed deeply. "It's because the town has chosen you," he said, his words chilling in their simplicity. "Everyone who comes here stays. The town doesn't let you leave." Tom's stomach dropped. "But why? What does that even mean?" "I don't know how it works," the old man admitted, his gaze distant. "But I know this. Once you're here, the town keeps you. Sometimes it welcomes new people. Sometimes it doesn't. But if you're here now, it means the town has decided to keep you." The old man's words hit Tom like a ton of bricks. "You'll never find your way out," the old man said, his voice calm but final, like a sentence passed down by a judge. Tom sat in stunned silence, his mind racing for an explanation, but deep down, he felt a suffocating sense of inevitability. The walls of his reality were closing in. Tom was no longer in denial. This town was a trap. Days passed, and each failed attempt to leave weighed on him like a heavy chain. It felt as if the town itself was alive, twisting reality to keep him there. But the nights were the worst. As he lay in his small room at the inn, an oppressive silence filled the air. Then, faintly, he began to hear it. A whispering, soft at first but unmistakable. At first, he thought it was his imagination, but the voices grew louder, more distinct. They called his name, "Tom, Tom." He leapt from the bed and looked out the window, but the streets were deserted. Still, The voices continued, circling his thoughts like a relentless wind. Sleep became impossible. By morning, he was exhausted and jittery, but he resolved to push through the fear. He had to find answers. As he walked through the town, he realized something had changed. The friendly facade of the locals had eroded. Their smiles were wider, almost forced, and their eyes were colder than before. When he passed by, they stopped what they were doing and stared at him. He could hear their faint whispers but couldn't make out the words. It was as if the entire town was conspiring against him. His frustration mounted as he walked aimlessly, trying to find any clue about the town's origin. On the outskirts, he stumbled upon an abandoned house. It was run down, with broken windows and a roof that sagged under years of neglect. Inside, the air was stale, thick with dust and decay. He climbed up to the attic, stepping carefully on creaking floorboards. There, in the corner, he found it, a weathered, leather-bound journal. The journal belonged to another traveler, someone who had been trapped in the town long before Tom. As he flipped through the pages, he saw echoes of his own experiences. The strange smiles, the whispers, the endless roads that led back to the same place. But the entries became more frantic as the journal went on. The traveler described how the town seemed to know his every thought, twisting his mind and driving him to despair. "It knows what you want. It knows how to keep you here," one entry read. But it was the final entry that chilled Tom to the core. Scrawled in jagged handwriting, as if written in desperation, were the words, "The town doesn't let go. I can't fight it anymore. It's taken me." The journal ended there, leaving an ominous silence that seemed to echo in the room. Clutching the journal, Tom left the house and returned to the inn. The whispers from the night before now seemed louder in his mind, as if the town itself was speaking to him. The faces of the townsfolk grew even more hostile. As he walked through the streets, he felt their eyes following him, their presence closing in like shadows that never left. By the time Tom returned to his room, he knew he had little time left. The journal had shown him what the town could do, how it consumed people one by one. His heart raced as the realization set in. If he didn't act now, he would be next. Tom realized he had to act, or the town would consume him like the others. Tom knew he couldn't wait any longer. The journal had given him hints, but no clear answers. One thing, however, stood out. The center of the town held the key. He recalled the clock tower, a massive structure in the town square that loomed over everything. Its enormous clock face, forever frozen at 3:15, seemed to pulse with a strange energy. The more Tom thought about it, the more he was convinced that it was the source of the town's power. That night, under the cover of darkness, Tom made his way to the clock tower. He found an old, broken window at the back of the building and climbed inside. The interior was eerily silent, with high ceilings and dimly lit corridors. The smell of old wood and dust filled the air. In the center of the main hall, a spiral staircase led upward to the clock mechanism. Tom took a deep breath and began his ascent. When he reached the top, he was met with a sight that took his breath away. The clock mechanism was massive, its gears and cogs moving slowly, even though the clock face showed no change in time. Strange symbols were etched into the metal, glowing faintly in the darkness. The machine seemed almost alive, humming with an unnatural energy. Tom could feel it, the power that kept the town in its grasp. As he studied the mechanism, he heard a sound that made his blood run cold. The creaking of footsteps on the stairs below. He turned to see several townsfolk climbing up toward him, their faces blank but their eyes filled with something dark and menacing. "You don't understand what you're doing," one of them said, their voice echoing in the confined space. "The clock keeps us safe. It protects us from what's outside." Tom's mind raced. "Safe? This place is a trap. You call this safety?" He shouted back, his voice trembling with anger and fear. Another voice, this time a woman's, replied, "You think you can leave? You think there's freedom outside? The world beyond this town is chaos. Here we survive. You destroy this, and you doom us all." Tom felt a moment of doubt. Could they be telling the truth? Was the clock really keeping something worse at bay? But as he looked at their hollow expressions, their lifeless eyes, he realized that whatever the clock was protecting them from, it had already taken their humanity. He couldn't live like this. He wouldn't. Ignoring their warnings, Tom turned back to the mechanism and spotted a large lever near the center. His hands trembled as he reached for it. The townsfolk began to climb faster, their shouts growing louder. "Don't do it!" one of them screamed, but it was too late. Tom pulled the lever with all his strength. The clock mechanism groaned, and the gears began to slow. A deep, resonating sound filled the air as the symbols on the metal dimmed and faded. Then, with a deafening snap, the entire machine came to a halt. The clock face cracked, and the hands fell limp. The effects were immediate. The ground beneath the clock tower trembled, and outside, the town began to change. Buildings started to dissolve into dust, their walls collapsing as if erased by an invisible force. The roads disintegrated, leaving nothing but barren earth. The townsfolk stood frozen, their expressions twisting into anger and despair. Slowly, one by one, they began to fade, their bodies turning to ash and scattering into the wind. Tom ran down the spiral staircase as the tower itself began to crumble. He burst out onto the street, now a wasteland of shadows and debris. Ahead of him, the road he had taken to enter the town reappeared, stretching out into the forest. Without hesitation, he sprinted to his car, started the engine, and drove away as fast as he could. After several minutes of driving, Tom dared to glance back. The town was gone. Where it once stood was now an empty field, silent and desolate, as if it had never existed. The choice was clear: stay and live a lie, or destroy everything and risk it all. Tom stood by his car, staring at the empty field where the town had once been. The road ahead led back to the real world, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. The memory of the town, the whispers, and the people who had dissolved into nothing lingered in his mind like a heavy shadow. He had escaped, but at what cost? Driving back to his apartment, Tom tried to convince himself it was over. The town was gone and he was free. Days turned into weeks, and life seemed to return to normal. Yet, no matter how hard he tried, the feeling of unease never left him. It was as if the town had left a mark on him, an invisible scar that refused to heal. One evening, as he sat in his living room, something caught his eye. On the coffee table lay a yellowed piece of paper. He hadn't left it there, and he was sure it wasn't there before. Picking it up, he saw familiar handwriting, the same jagged scrawl from the journal he had found in the town. The message was simple, but chilling: "The town doesn't forget." His hands trembled as he dropped the paper, his breath quickening. Beside it lay a small, metallic object, a key with strange symbols etched into it, identical to the ones on the clock mechanism. It was impossible, yet it was there, a piece of the town now in his home. Tom's heart raced as he stood up and looked around. The shadows in the room seemed darker, deeper than they should have been. As he turned toward the window, he froze. In the reflection, he saw them, figures standing behind him, their shapes faint but unmistakable. They were the townsfolk, their hollow eyes staring straight at him. The whispers began again, soft at first but growing louder, echoing in his mind. "The town is always with you," they murmured, their voices intertwining with his thoughts. He spun around, but the room was empty. Or was it? The air felt heavier, colder, and he could feel their presence, even if he couldn't see them. Tom sat down, his hands gripping the edge of the table, his breathing shallow. He realized the truth. The town may have disappeared from the map, but it hadn't truly let him go. It was a part of him now, a shadow that would follow him wherever he went. Tom understood. The town might vanish from the map, but it would always remain a part of him. If you've made it this far, thank you for watching. This is just the beginning of the stories we'll uncover here at Horror Haven. Don't forget to subscribe for more chilling tales, and hit the notification bell so you'll never miss the next journey into the unknown. Until next time, stay safe. Or, at the very least, stay in the light.